A top U.S. general is not convinced alleged Russian bounties led to the death of any American soldiers. Marine Corps General Kenneth Frank McKenzie, the leader of U.S. Central Command, told reporters he found the alleged intelligence troublesome. He says the Pentagon has not been able to corroborate the intelligence. Intel agencies believe Russia paid Taliban soldiers to target U.S. troops in Afghanistan. General McKenzie says nothing has changed in terms of force protection, and he encouraged intel officials to keep digging. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is investigating the source of the leaked intelligence. Sources tell our Catherine Herridge the probe is occurring because of the sensitivity of the intel and the collection methods. It's unclear who the administration believes is a suspect. The White House has denied reports the president knew as early as February about the intelligence. Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger is a Democrat representing Virginia's 7th District. She also sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and she joins me now. Welcome, Congresswoman. So, do you believe the administration has the authority to investigate who may have leaked this intelligence?
Well, as a former intelligence officer myself, I'm a former CIA case officer. I think it's incredibly important that we recognize the threat that leaks of intelligence do pose. And so I think it is important to understand how leaks have happened and potentially avoid them in the future. But I think the fact that the administration is so aggressively attempting to investigate this leak demonstrates just how important and how sensitive, to use the words from your introduction, this intelligence and this information is. And what I think is really disappointing is that the administration is not using that same level of dedication and motivation to ensure that they understand the full scope of the threat that exists to U.S. service members in Afghanistan, and to ensure that Russia knows that we will not tolerate it, which is a condemnation I have yet to hear from this White House.
And earlier I mentioned some of General McKenzie's thoughts on the matter. Are you aware of any evidence U.S. soldiers were killed because of these bounties? CBS News did have a source, a senior Afghan official, who seemed to confirm at least part of the intelligence, not necessarily the part that U.S. troops were actually killed, but at least that he'd heard of this happening. So what questions do you still have for the administration about this intelligence?
So I have no questions about the existing intelligence. My questions are, what are we doing to further confirm or disprove the intelligence that exists there? So far, there's been a case built by compounding elements of intelligence. And as a former CIA case officer, I used to work in the area of human intelligence. So when we collect from individuals and information, there's signals intelligence, there's liaison provided intelligence, and all of this intelligence is brought together to build a story and to fill out a puzzle of what potentially happened in any circumstance. But when we're speaking about the notion that the Russian government put bounties on the heads of U.S. soldiers and service members in Afghanistan, it is my expectation that the White House and that our intelligence community will continue to collect all information possible to demonstrate how the scope of what this threat is and whether indeed there were any Marines or soldiers or sailors or anyone murdered for a Russian paid bounty.
And then, as you were saying earlier, I guess also to formulate a response to that, to the Russian government. Last week, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo defended the administration's handling of this intel because he said it was uncorroborated. So let's play some of his remarks.
The fact that the Russians are engaged in Afghanistan in a way that's adverse to the United States is nothing new. By the way, some members of Congress are out there today suggesting that they are shocked and appalled by this. They saw the same intelligence that we saw. So it would be interesting to ask them what they did when they saw whatever intelligence is that they are referring to.
So, Congresswoman, as you were saying, you are a former CIA operations officer. So based on what you know, do you believe that proper protocol was followed in this situation?
So when there's intelligence that there is verifiable, and the only thing I will agree with that Secretary Pompeo has said related to these allegations is the fact that there's nothing new about Russian malign action, which is exactly why we should take it seriously when they up the ante and move from providing weapons or engaging with the Taliban or other shadow actors throughout the world when they up the ante and move to the place of possibly putting bounties on the heads of our service members. And so what I know as a former intelligence officer is that if there is information that comes in that reaches the level of going in the presidential daily brief, there is reason to believe that that information needs to be seen by top U.S. officials, that information, whether 100% corroborated or not, at least has risen to a level where it is determined to be of the utmost importance. As a former intel officer, the days your information gets put in the PDB means you're doing your job. And it is a high bar. It is a high level of success, knowing that your information went to inform the president. So the fact that this information would have been in the PDB back in February meant that it had already met a certain level of threshold related to the need to protect U.S. service members in Afghanistan.
And of course, you sit on the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee dealing with Europe and Eurasia, which had a hearing on crimes committed by the Kremlin abroad. What recommendations did you receive from the experts on how to deal with this matter, and what actions are you encouraging the Foreign Affairs Committee to take?
So the larger Foreign Affairs Committee, the full committee, has a hearing tomorrow focused on Russian bounties on the heads of U.S. service members. Unfortunately, Secretary Pompeo has declined to attend that briefing. This is consistent with some of his past decisions, but when we're talking about something as serious as bounties on the heads of U.S. soldiers and service members, I would have hoped that he would choose to attend this event. Among the things that we discussed yesterday in our subcommittee hearing was bringing information to the forefront. At the beginning of our conversation, we talked about leaks, and I, as a former intelligence officer, do not believe that leaks are helpful, appropriate, or in any way legal. And so now I would say, at this point, the administration, and this was one of the recommendations made by the experts yesterday, and we had experts who served in previous administrations, Republicans and Democrats, or Democratic administrations, bring the intelligence out. Declassify what is possible to declassify for a couple reasons. And this was the recommendation, but one that I agree with. Bringing the intelligence out, declassify what is possible to declassify, protecting sources and methods, of course, but allow the American people to know what is out there, and allow the Russians to know that we have good information about the threats that they either do or do not wish to pose to American service members abroad. And we need to be ready to take aggressive action. You know, Russia has a history of attacking the democracies of Western nations, ours included, in the way that it meddled and attempted to sow discord in advance of our 2016 elections. They've been doing it in other countries. They have attempted assassinations of dissidents in other countries. This is part and parcel with their pattern of behavior. That doesn't mean we accept it. In fact, the United States of America should never accept their malign activity, and most especially the idea that they would put bounties on the heads of U.S. service members. And what we've yet to hear from this administration, and I was among a small group of Democrats who went to the White House last week, and what I said specifically to the chief of staff is we need to hear from this White House and from this president that he will do everything possible to get to the bottom of these allegations, and that he is putting Russia on notice that if this is determined from his perspective and from the larger community's perspective to be true, that we will not stand for this level of aggression. And we need a strong position from the United States, and we need a strong position, frankly, from the commander-in-chief when it comes to issues of force protection of our service members who are already serving in harm's way. And we owe it to their family members. Any person who sends their loved one off to Afghanistan needs to know that the United States government has their back, and that we will not allow and not stand by when a foreign adversary nation makes their engagement in Afghanistan or their presence in Afghanistan that much more dangerous by literally putting dollars on their heads.
Well, Representative Abigail Spanberger, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.